It doesn't matter whether you're working digitally or traditionally. Like I've always said, it's more about the tool. No, actually, no, it's more about the user versus the tool. You know what I'm saying? But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be using my sketchbook because I haven't done a lot of traditional stuff on this channel for a while. It's mostly been digital, so I'm just going to spice it up a little bit. Also, it's easier to access that, so I'm just going to be working with a sketchbook, pencil, eraser, pretty straightforward. And we're going to go over the best ways to practice drawing and sketching. What's the difference? I guess drawing is more refined, more finished. But who decides what's finished? Before we get sidetracked, best ways to practice drawing. Like I said, you get your tools, but you get whatever you have. Again, it's more important to just do, be active. Don't let perfection be the enemy of production or just enemy of the good in general. Just make something happen. You know what I'm saying? If a sketchbook, pencil, paper is all you got, go for it. And if digital is all you got, go for it. For me, there hasn't been that much of a difference. I'm sure there are, but we're not going to go into that. When you're drawing, starting out, you want to improve, always try to have a relaxed mind. A lot of people I see, they're drawing and they're very afraid of making a mistake and they're going really slow and the lines are really scratchy. Be free, be loose, make that mistake. All the kids are doing it. There is something called the eraser. And worse, if you're working digitally, Control-Z is your friend, baby. And then sometimes you want to keep your mistakes so you remember them and you know not to make them again. For me, when sketching with the goal to improve, you want to practice and all of that, I always have a goal in mind where there is, some milestone you're trying to hit, something you're trying to accomplish, some way you can measure your growth. I think having that encourages people to move forward. There are minor goals that you can have, maybe you're trying to learn specific things, but if you have overarching goals, that can help dictate what your mini goals are going to be. For instance, if you want to make a comic, right, and maybe the comic has to do with sci-fi stuff, then you have these mini goals of getting acquainted with drawing more sci-fi, maybe mecha, spaceship, that kind of stuff, right? So you then have a more focused objective of what to research or what to look for when trying to find reference. Working on your comic and there's this panel you're trying to accomplish and you want the characters to be in a certain pose, then you have a goal in mind. Okay, you can't draw that pose, so you know what to look for in order to learn to draw that pose. You know what reference to find to get that. Always use reference. I'd say not necessarily trace, but use it to not need it anymore. Use reference to not need to use reference anymore. Great sources are simply, Google Images, Pinterest, whatever is closest to you, as long as you get the job done. It's much more convenient and less daunting to learn some specific poses that you need to learn how to draw versus trying to learn every single pose at once. It's not possible. Come on. Now, that is separate from your general research of trying to study anatomy. Let's say you have trouble with drawing parts of the body or just body poses or dynamic poses, drawing the face or hands or feet or just general dynamic action poses from more challenging camera angles. Also want to have your general studies for that. But if you come across a certain pose you have in your head and you don't know how to do it, then you have that mini goal of trying to learn how to draw that specific thing. And you need to know how to draw that because you have this overarching goal of maybe trying to do, whether it be a comic or an animation, whatever the case may be. And it doesn't have to be that big in the beginning. You can, again, start small, have tiny goals, but in general, having some kind of goals or milestones to hit help give you some focus. Also makes it easier for you to measure your growth. Like I've already said, references are key. But the goal is to not need them. You're just trying to study, not necessarily copy, right? You're not drawing with the mindset that, okay, I'm going to use this reference again when I need to draw this same pose. You're trying to learn it so you can not only draw that pose, but maybe draw it and maybe makes a couple tweaks to it, make it really yours. Or because you've learned how to draw this pose, you have a stronger idea of how to draw maybe a different pose, but similar. There are many ways to practice this, and you can apply some of these principles to literally anything, not just human anatomy, but maybe drawing mechas or drawing whatever the case may be. You find the references wherever you can find them, i.e. say a Pinterest or whatever. Pick your favorites. Sometimes you don't always need to go to a Pinterest. Sometimes if you're reading your favorite comics or watching your favorite TV shows, take some snapshots, screenshots, whatever you want, things that you found interesting, keep them and add them to your, I don't know, reference board, if you will. And what I like to do with those, in fact, how I learned to draw, was to keep drawing those same poses over and over again. The poses that you struggled with, the poses that you found interesting, the poses that you wanted to be able to draw without looking or draw without thinking about anything, just easily draw them over and over again, and then compare it with the original. Find the errors. You're also in this process training your eyes to find your errors, because that's another big deal. That's another big way to learn to improve your art style, to improve your art in general, and just improve your practicing, right? To show that you're actually growing is if you can recognize when you've made a mistake or you've made an error. Once you recognize what the error is, you then draw the same thing again. Repetition is also key. It kind of helps your hand, muscle memory, all of that, even your speed, because you get more comfortable. You build confidence the more you draw the same thing over again, because you know where all the lines are going to go for the most part, especially if you're, again, recognizing your errors and correcting them, right? So the next time you draw, you have it at the back of your mind that, okay, I always make that mistake when I'm drawing the eyebrows, or the ears are always too high, and whatever the case may be. So when you're drawing the ears again, you tend not to make that mistake. And when you're done with this second iteration, you compare it to the original again. And you keep doing this until your drawing, even with reference, your drawing is about over 90% accurate to the original. It's never going to be 100%, but the closer the better. Once you can draw it, again, with a lot of iteration, this same pose with a high percentage of accuracy, then try drawing it without reference. When you're comfortable, you've drawn it so many times, you're used to it, try drawing it without reference. And this time, you do the same thing, but now the whole process is done all over again, but without reference. You draw it, and then compare it to the original, and you keep doing it, finding all your errors, fixing it with each iteration until the percentage of accuracy is over 90%. If you're having trouble recognizing the errors in your drawings and not knowing what's wrong, maybe you know something is off but you can't put your finger on it, you can use this little line technique that's derived from a grid. Generally, you see artists when they're trying to draw their little drawings here or little portraits and they want it to be like super accurate, they do a grid. Then they take their canvas and they split their canvas into a grid that's identical, pretty much the same, except for maybe the ratio might be a little off. Maybe their canvas is blown up, so their grid, while it still has the same amount of squares, is just maybe blown up a little bit, or reduced. It depends on what the artist is doing. It's broken down into a grid. That way, all the lines can be connected easier. They can follow everything much easier. You're less likely to make an error with the lines or know where, say you're drawing that portrait, right, where the facial features are going to be placed. It's going to be really, really accurate. So taking that idea, you can use little horizontal and vertical lines to go across your original and try to see how that line interacts with the rest of the drawing. And then try to draw that same line in the same position on your own drawing and see what happens, see what it touches. If the lines interact with the rest of the drawing the same way, then you're more accurate than not. And if it doesn't, it's much easier to spot where the error is. So as an example, with what's wrong with this drawing, you can see that if we draw a straight line from like the tip of this elbow right down, we're kind of splitting this back in half, right? But if we draw a straight line from the tip of the elbow from the reference, we're not necessarily splitting it in half. In fact, we are just not, which means that if you go back to the original drawing, I need to make an adjustment, or at least I know to make an adjustment for next time if I was going to draw this again, to extend the back, which kind of makes sense, right? Because there's a lot of perspective stuff happening right here, and so that means that the parts of the body that are closer to the camera should be bigger, and so we know to make those adjustments for next time. I drew the belt touching, say, the pinky finger a little bit. At least from our perspective, the line is touching it. So you're also looking at the lines of the drawing and their characteristics with other lines in the same drawing. And so here, the belt isn't necessarily touching the tip of the pinky. nearly as much. So I then know to move that belt slightly over. See, the tip of the belt touches like the leg. Again, it's not really touching the leg, it's just from our perspective, we're drawing lines, the lines would kind of meet. And so you want to make sure your lines are meeting in a similar way. This vertical line is kind of derived from that grid approach, but instead of using all the lines in the grid, we're just using this one line to figure out how the rest of the lines kind of interact with one another so we get a more accurate drawing. It doesn't always have to be a vertical line, it could be a horizontal line that you're kind of using to measure the distances between lines and other lines, or the spaces in between lines, or where the lines touch each other. So it's not just horizontal or vertical lines, but you're also looking at the reference and kind of breaking it down into lines in your head and seeing what lines touch one another and making sure that those lines touch on your own drawing. If they don't, that's a good way to spot that there's an error there. Once you improve that, big step. Another way is to get feedback from other artists. You know, they may be able to spot things that your eyes wouldn't be able to, maybe if you've just been looking at the same thing the whole time. They kind of see things from a different perspective, especially if they're an artist you admire. If you can get their feedback, that also helps. But keep in mind is patience. You have to be patient throughout this whole process. There's a lot of repetition, there's a lot of drawing, but the goal here is to learn to spot your mistakes, all your errors, and fix them, not make them again the next time. Measure your growth, and also build confidence with your drawings. Another thing I advise is to keep your wrist pretty loose when sketching. Press lightly, gently on the paper, and also kind of crazy, looking for the right line. And then once you feel like you've found it with all your crazy attempts to find it, once you feel like you found it, you can then press down a little harder and also more confidently to get your desired line. You don't have to get it on the first try. You got time. Another good source for references, as well as doing a lot of warm-up sketches to kind of get your hand in the groove, is to use like the training websites where they throw a lot of references at you, and the references are only going to stay there for a period of time, only a couple seconds, and you're basically tasked with drawing all the key features of that drawing really quickly, and then moving on to the next. And again, it's a good way to kind of also up your speed, because you know, speed as an artist is also key, along with being an indicator of building confidence with your drawing. A lot of drawing is believing that what you're drawing is going to look somewhat good, right? When you're over doubting and overthinking things a little too much, you're going to be spending a whole lot more time drawing, you're going to make a whole lot more mistakes, and it's gonna look more rigid. Like the drawing will suffer as a result of that lack of confidence. So you also want to build confidence, muscle memory, speed, all those things. They help a great deal, even when doing those repetitions. In fact, I advise when doing the repetitions of trying to draw the same pose over and over, each time you draw it, time yourself and try to see if you can beat your previous time, while still maintaining a steady trajectory, growing towards, you know, higher accuracy of, you know, how it looks compared to the original. Being able to draw fast has a ton of other perks as well. If you're an animator, comic artist, whatever you are, if you can draw fast. So a little recap for all the key things that we mentioned throughout this video. Get your tools, don't really matter what the tools are. Get some. Relax, chill, find ways to measure your growth. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Loose wrist. Do a lot of gesture drawings, light strokes of the pencil to find the right line, and once you do find it, then you can darken that actual line. Maybe have an overarching goal that can help add some focus into what you actually want to learn, therefore making learning and practicing less daunting because you have more focus. You're not trying to learn to draw everything. Use reference, but generally study reference with the intent to not need reference anymore. Draw things over and over again, and make sure you're improving each time. Train your eyes to find your errors. Use the grid line technique that we talked about to improve you finding errors. Get feedback from credible sources if you have that option. Time yourself, work on your speed as well as your confidence. Do your general studies of anything you want to learn. Again, especially when it has more focus, it makes things easier. And lastly, be patient. Be prepared to spend a decent amount of time trying to draw. It's not going to happen overnight. And then have fun while it lasts. Please don't forget to like this video. Hopefully go smash that subscribe button, hit the bell so you stay notified each time I upload absolutely anything. We actually are having a how to draw book, and I'll leave links in the description so where you guys can go pre-order that. It's called How to Draw Diverse Manga. The links to everything you possibly need will be in the description below. Social media, Saturday AM social media, where my manga Apple Black is published and serialized. Details in Apple Black Volume 3 and 4 are coming soon. I'll be doing more sketching videos on this channel, so stay tuned for that to help you guys build more confidence while doing your own drawings. Check out more videos on the channel. WHYTMANGA, and I'm Audi 9000.